The sky over the Pacific Ocean turned green at 4:12 in the morning. Not the green of an aurora, not the green of a storm. It was a hard, metallic green, like a bruise spreading across the stars. Fishermen on small boats near the Philippines were the first to see it. They pointed their phones at the sky and filmed the light before their signals went dead. By sunrise, every major space agency on Earth had confirmed the same thing. Something enormous had entered the solar system. It was not an asteroid. It was not a comet. It was a fleet. General Elena Voss was in her office in Colorado when the call came. She had been awake for 2 days straight, dealing with a border skirmish in Eastern Europe that now seemed laughably small. Her phone buzzed twice, which was the signal for an emergency that could not wait. She picked it up before it finished the second buzz. "Ma'am, you need to see this," said the voice on the other end. It belonged to Colonel Briggs, her second in command, and he sounded like a man who had just watched his own house catch fire. Voss walked into the command center 5 minutes later. The room was already full. Screens lined every wall, each one showing a different feed. Radar images, satellite photos, telescope data from observatories around the world. At the center of it all was a single object, magnified as much as the equipment allowed. It looked like a black diamond with jagged edges, and around it moved smaller shapes, dozens of them, then hundreds. "Talk to me," Voss said. A young analyst named Corbin stood up so fast he knocked over his coffee. He didn't notice. "Ma'am, we picked this up 11 hours ago near the orbit of Jupiter. At first we thought it was a rogue asteroid cluster. Then it changed course." "Nothing natural changes course like that." "How big?" "The main structure is roughly 40 kilometers across. The smaller ships around it, we count at least 300 so far, and that number keeps climbing." Voss felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face still. That was her job. If the room saw her afraid, the room would fall apart. "Do we have any communication from them?" "No, ma'am, nothing. No signal, no response to our messages. We've tried every frequency we know." "Trajectory?" Corbin swallowed hard. "Earth, ma'am. Direct course. They'll be in orbit within 6 days." The room went quiet, except for the hum of computers and the soft beeping of a dozen instruments, tracking a fleet that no one on the planet had asked for, and no one knew how to fight. 6 days is not a long time to prepare for a war against something you don't understand. But humanity tried. Every nation on Earth, for once, spoke to each other without lies or games. Presidents called prime ministers called generals called scientists. The United Nations held an emergency session that lasted 18 hours without a single bathroom break that mattered, because nobody wanted to miss what might be the last calm meeting the human race would ever hold. Dr. Amara Chen watched the session from a research station in New Mexico, deep inside a mountain, in a facility whose name did not appear on any public map. She was 44 years old, small in stature, with sharp eyes that missed very little. She had spent the last 19 years of her life working on a project so secret that even her own mother believed she designed water filtration systems for the government. She was not thinking about water filtration systems now. Her phone rang. The screen showed no name, only a code. Oversight 1. She answered immediately. "Dr. Chen," said a voice she recognized, tired and old, belonging to a man named Director Holloway, the head of the group that had employed her for nearly 2 decades. "You've seen the news." "I've seen it. The council convened an hour ago. They want options. Real options, not press conferences." Chen closed her eyes. She had known this day might come. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that it never would. "Sir, you know what I'm going to say. I need you to say it anyway, out loud, on record." She took a breath. "Cronus is not ready. We've made progress, real progress, but the core systems are still in partial dormancy. If we wake it before the calibration is finished, we don't know what happens. It could fail completely. It could backfire in ways we can't predict. And if we don't wake it at all?" Chen didn't answer right away. Outside her window, through thick reinforced glass, she could see the desert stretching out under a sky that used to feel infinite and safe. Now it felt like a target. "Then we fight this war with rifles and jets against something 40 kilometers wide," she finally said. "Sir, I'll do what I can. Give me time." "Time," Holloway said quietly, "is the one thing none of us have anymore." The alien fleet entered Earth's orbit on the morning of the 6th day, exactly as predicted. There was no dramatic broadcast, no giant ship hovering over a famous city the way the movies always showed it. Instead, the invaders were methodical, calm, terrifyingly calm. The first attacks came not against cities, but against infrastructure. Satellites went dark one by one, their communications simply erased. Then came the landings. Not soldiers marching down ramps, but massive drilling platforms that descended into remote regions, the Australian outback, the heart of the Amazon rainforest, the frozen wastes of Siberia, the deep mineral belts of the African continent. These were places rich in rare earth metals, in uranium, in elements humanity had barely begun to use. The aliens were not there to conquer cities. They were there to mine. Voss stood in the command center as reports flooded in from every continent. A drilling platform had appeared 60 miles outside of Perth, Australia, and had begun tearing into the earth with beams of light that cut through solid rock like it was paper. When a squadron of Australian jets attempted to intercept it, they were shot down within seconds by defense drones that moved faster than anything humanity had built. "They're not even trying to hide what they want," Briggs said, staring at the screen. "They're just taking it." "Casualties?" Voss asked. 12 pilots, so far. And that's just Australia. We're getting the same reports from Brazil, from Kazakhstan, from the Congo. "Ma'am, they're stripping the planet like it's a resource depot." Voss felt something cold settle into her chest, something that wasn't quite fear, but was close to it. Fear for her people, fear for her species, and underneath all of that, a spark of something else. Anger. "Get me the president," she said, "and get me every allied commander who will pick up the phone. We are not going to sit here and watch them dig up our planet." The first real battle happened over the South China Sea, 4 days after the invasion began. A coalition of naval and air forces from a dozen countries attempted a coordinated strike against one of the smaller alien vessels, a scout-class ship roughly the size of an aircraft carrier that had been observed scanning the ocean floor. It did not go well. Humanity's missiles, some of the most advanced in the world, struck the alien ship's shields and simply dissolved, as if they had hit a wall of water instead of solid metal. The alien ship responded with a single pulse of energy that disabled every electronic system within a 10-mile radius. Ships lost power, jets fell from the sky. It was not a massacre in the traditional sense. The aliens did not seem interested in killing everyone they could, but it was a humiliation, a demonstration of just how far behind humanity truly was. Voss watched the footage in silence. Around her, officers who had spent their whole careers believing in the strength of modern militaries now sat pale and quiet, staring at screens that showed the truth none of them wanted to accept. "We can't win this with what we have," Briggs said finally. "I know," Voss said. "So what do we do?" Voss didn't answer immediately. She was thinking of a rumor she had heard years ago, back when she was a young colonel with a security clearance just high enough to catch fragments of conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Whispers about a facility beneath the lunar surface, a project older than her own career, older than most of the people currently running the world's governments. She had always assumed it was nonsense, one of those conspiracy stories that floated around every military the way ghost stories floated around old houses. But now she remembered something else, a name, Cronus. She picked up her phone and called a number she had only used twice before in her life. Dr. Chen was in the middle of running diagnostics when her secure line rang. She almost didn't answer it. She had told her staff not to interrupt her, but the caller ID showed a military designation she recognized, and something told her to pick up. "This is Chen. General Elena Voss," said the voice on the other end. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of Project Cronus." Chen's hand tightened around the phone. Very few people outside her own organization knew that name. "I'm sorry, General. I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't waste my time, Doctor. I have 11 pilots dead, and an alien fleet stripping my planet for parts, and I have heard rumors about something under the moon for 15 years. I need to know if those rumors are true, and I need to know now." Chen glanced at the clearance panel beside her desk, then at the photograph pinned to her wall, a picture of the moon, taken decades ago, with a small red circle marking a crater that did not appear on any public star chart under its true designation. She thought of Holloway's words. "Time is the one thing none of us have anymore." "General," she said slowly. I think we need to talk in person. 3 hours later, Voss stood inside a briefing room she had never known existed, buried beneath a mountain in New Mexico, surrounded by screens showing data she didn't yet understand. Dr. Chen stood at the front of the room, along with 2 other scientists and a man in a gray suit who introduced himself only as Director Holloway. What I'm about to tell you, Holloway said, has been classified at the highest level for over 60 years. Fewer than 200 people currently alive know what I'm about to show you. That number is about to grow, because we no longer have the luxury of secrecy. He nodded to Chen, who tapped a command into her console. The main screen lit up with an image of the moon, rotating slowly, before zooming in on a region near the far side, an area humanity's public space programs had barely photographed. In 1969, Holloway continued, during a classified extension of the Apollo program that never appeared in any official record, astronauts discovered something beneath the lunar surface. Not a natural formation, a structure. Artificial, built by intelligence far beyond our own, and older than human civilization, possibly older than human beings as a species. Voss stared at the screen, at the faint outline of something enormous buried under miles of lunar rock, visible only through decades of careful subsurface scanning. We call it Cronus, Chen said. For 60 years, a small group of scientists, engineers, and military officers has studied it in secret. We've learned to read fragments of its systems. We believe it was left here deliberately, by a civilization that once fought a war very similar to the one that just arrived at our doorstep. You're telling me, Voss said slowly, that there is an ancient alien facility under the moon, and you've known about it for 60 years, and you never told anyone? We were ordered to keep it secret, Holloway said, until humanity was either ready to use it, or desperate enough to need it. The Council believes we have reached that point. Voss felt her jaw tighten. 15 years ago, she had heard whispers of this. She had dismissed them as fantasy. Now an alien invasion fleet was stripping her planet of its resources, and the only hope humanity might have was buried under a pile of moon dust that scientists had been poking at in secret for 6 decades. What is it? She asked. What does it do? Chen exchanged a glance with Holloway before she answered. We're not entirely sure, she admitted, but we believe it's a weapon. A very old, very powerful weapon, built by beings who understood exactly the kind of enemy that just entered our solar system. And General, we think it's still waiting for someone to wake it up. Outside, unseen by anyone in that briefing room, the alien fleet continued its slow, patient work above the Earth, drilling deeper into the planet's crust with every passing hour, utterly unaware that humanity's oldest secret had just begun to stir. General Elena Voss did not sleep that night. She sat in the briefing room long after Holloway and his scientists had gone to rest, staring at the rotating image of the moon and the faint shape buried beneath its far side. Somewhere above her, an alien fleet was tearing through her planet's crust, and somewhere beneath her feet, the mountain hummed quietly, with machines that had been guarding a secret for 60 years. She thought about her father, a mechanic who used to tell her that every machine, no matter how broken, could be fixed if you understood what it was built to do. She wondered if the same was true of secrets. If you understood why they were kept, could you undo the damage of keeping them? At 6 in the morning, Dr. Chen found her still sitting there. You should rest, Chen said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. So should you, Voss replied, taking one of the cups anyway. Chen sat across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chen said, You want to know why we never told anyone? I want to know if Cronus can save my planet, Voss said. The rest is politics, and I don't have time for politics. Chen almost smiled. It was the first real, human expression Voss had seen from her since they'd met. Fair enough. Let me show you something. She led Voss down a long corridor, past security checkpoints that required 3 separate forms of identification, until they reached a room that looked less like a laboratory and more like an ancient library crossed with a spacecraft cockpit. Along the walls were panels covered in symbols that resembled no human alphabet Voss had ever seen, angular, flowing shapes that seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle you looked at them. This is a partial reconstruction, Chen explained, of language fragments we've recovered from Cronus over the decades. We call the builders the architects because we don't know what they called themselves. Based on what we've translated, they were a spacefaring civilization that reached a level of technology far beyond ours, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago. And they built something under our moon. They built many things, all across this part of the galaxy, as far as we can tell. Cronus isn't unique. It's one node in what we believe was a much larger network. A defense system, spread across many worlds, meant to protect against a specific threat. Voss felt a chill. What threat? Chen tapped a control, and one of the wall panels shifted to display something new. A rough, reconstructed image, blurry and incomplete, showing ships that looked disturbingly similar to the ones now orbiting Earth. We call them the Vraxel, Chen said. That's not their real name either. We don't know their real name. But the architects left records describing a species that traveled from world to world, consuming resources, stripping planets bare, then moving on. According to the fragments we've translated, the Vraxel have been doing this for a very, very long time. Voss stared at the image. You're saying this isn't the first time they've done this? We're saying it's probably not the 1000th time, Chen said quietly. And the architects built defenses because they had seen what happens to civilizations that don't fight back. While Voss and Chen spoke inside the mountain, the war above continued to worsen. In Brazil, the alien drilling platform near the Amazon had grown to nearly triple its original size, extending metal roots deep into the earth that pulsed with a faint blue light. Local military forces attempted 3 separate assaults on the structure, using everything from artillery to experimental laser weapons borrowed from allied nations. Each attempt failed. The structure's shields absorbed the damage as if it were nothing more than rain. In Kazakhstan, an entire mining town was evacuated after alien drones began herding civilians away from a resource-rich valley, using non-lethal pulses that left people dazed but unharmed. It was, in its own strange way, almost polite, as if the Vraxel considered human casualties an inconvenience rather than a goal. This detail was noted by analysts around the world, and it gave rise to a theory that spread quickly through military channels. The Vraxel were not here to destroy humanity. They were here to take what they wanted, and they would kill only those who got in their way. That theory did little to comfort the families of the pilots who had already died trying to stop them. By the end of the first week, the death toll from direct military engagements had climbed past 300, spread across a dozen countries. The economic damage was already being measured in the trillions. Governments that had spent decades arguing over minor political disputes now found themselves working together out of pure necessity, sharing intelligence, pooling resources, coordinating defense in a way the world had never seen before. It was, in a strange and terrible way, the most united humanity had ever been. It had simply taken the end of the world to accomplish it. Back in the mountain facility, Voss requested a full briefing on Cronus's history. Not the classified summary, but everything. Holloway, after a long conversation with the international council that oversaw the project, agreed to grant her full access, along with a small group of trusted officers she selected personally. Over the following 2 days, Voss learned the true scope of what had been hidden beneath the moon for 60 years. In 1969, during what the public knew as a routine Apollo mission, astronauts had detected unusual magnetic readings coming from beneath the lunar surface near the far side. A follow-up mission, kept entirely off the public record, confirmed the presence of an artificial structure buried under nearly 2 kilometers of rock. The structure was massive. Later scans suggested it stretched for over 80 kilometers underground, and it was, for the most part, completely dormant. No power signatures, no signs of activity, just an enormous, silent machine, waiting. For the first 20 years, the project focused entirely on excavation and study, moving with painstaking slowness to avoid triggering any defensive systems that might still be active. It was during this period that scientists first discovered the strange symbols and began the long, difficult work of translation. By the 1990s, a small team had successfully accessed what appeared to be the structure's outer control systems. This was when they first learned the name the architects had given their creation, a designation that roughly translated, across a dozen imperfect interpretations, to something like the sleeping guard, or the watcher that waits. The scientists at the time chose to call it Cronus, after the ancient Greek god who was said to sleep until the world needed him again. Progress remained slow for decades. The technology was so far beyond human understanding that even simple tasks, powering a single console, translating a single sentence, could take years of careful, methodical work. Several attempts to interface directly with the core systems resulted in catastrophic failures, including one incident in 2003 that killed 4 researchers when an experimental power conduit overloaded. It was Dr. Chen, arriving at the project in her mid-20s with a background in both linguistics and quantum engineering, who made the first true breakthrough. In 2015, she discovered that Cronus's systems responded not to electrical signals in the way human technology did, but to a form of resonance, a kind of harmonic frequency that had to be precisely matched before any system would respond. It was, as she often described it to her team, less like flipping a switch and more like tuning an ancient, impossibly complex instrument. From that point forward, progress accelerated. By the time the Vraxil fleet arrived in Earth's solar system, Cronus's outer defense grid had been partially mapped, its core systems partially understood, and a small, dedicated team had spent years preparing for the day they might need to wake it fully. That day had come far sooner than any of them had hoped. "How close are we?" Voss asked, standing beside Chen in the central control room, surrounded by the soft hum of machinery that had been running quietly for years, preparing for a moment no one was certain would ever arrive. "Closer than we were a month ago," Chen said. "Not close enough." "Explain." Chen brought up a diagram on the main screen, a cross-section of the lunar structure, color-coded to show which systems had been mapped, which had been activated, and which remained completely unknown. "Cronus has 3 primary layers," she explained. "The outer defense grid, which we believe includes automated weapons platforms and shield generators. The core intelligence, which may be some form of artificial mind, left behind by the architects to oversee the entire system. And the deepest layer, which we call the reserve, we believe this is where the actual firepower is stored. Ships, weapons, possibly something larger. We don't know exactly what. And which of these can we access right now? We've achieved partial control of the outer defense grid. Enough that, in theory, we could activate some of the shield generators and a handful of automated weapons platforms. But the core intelligence remains locked. Without it, we can't safely access the reserve. If we try to force our way in, we risk damaging systems we don't understand, possibly permanently." Voss studied the diagram for a long moment. How long would it take to unlock the core intelligence? Under normal circumstances, years, maybe longer. And under these circumstances, Chen met her eyes. "I don't know. But I know we don't have years." The decision to bring the matter before the full International Council was made 2 days later, after a Vraxil scout ship destroyed a coalition submarine attempting to monitor drilling activity beneath the Arctic ice. All 12 crew members were lost. It was the single largest loss of military life since the invasion began, and it shattered whatever patience remained among the world's leaders. Voss stood before the council via secure video link, alongside Holloway and Chen, and laid out everything she had learned. She spoke plainly, without exaggeration, because she knew that exaggeration would only breed more fear, and fear was already running dangerously high. "We are not winning this war," she said. "We are barely fighting it. Every weapon we have bounces off their shields like rain on a window. Every ship we send up gets shot down before it can even return fire. If we continue on this path, in a matter of weeks, we will have lost. Not the war, the ability to fight it at all." "And this project," said a representative from the council, her voice sharp with skepticism. "This ancient alien machine buried under the moon. You believe this is our answer?" "I believe it's our only chance," Voss said. "I've seen what it might contain. I've seen the defense grid Dr. Chen's team has already brought partially online. It's not a fantasy. It's real, and it's ours, whether we asked for it or not." There was a long silence on the call. Then the representative from China spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "For 60 years, a small group of people made this decision alone, without the consent of the world they claim to protect. I want that understood, and I want it addressed once this crisis has passed. But right now, we have a fleet stripping our planet of every resource it can find, and we have nothing that can stop them. If there is even a chance this project can change that, I say we take it." One by one, the other representatives agreed. It was not unanimous, A handful of voices raised concerns about the risks of activating a system no one fully understood, warning that it might backfire, might attract worse enemies, might do more harm than the Vraxil themselves. But in the end, desperation won out over caution, as it so often does in moments of war. The order was given. Project Cronus was authorized for full activation. Chen received the news standing in the control room, surrounded by her team, all of them staring at her with a mixture of hope and fear. She thought of the 4 researchers who had died in 2003, of the decades of careful, patient work that had led to this moment, of the ancient machine sleeping beneath the lunar surface, waiting for someone to finally wake it up. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Let's go wake up a god." Above them, unseen and unaware, the Vraxil fleet continued its slow, methodical harvest of the Earth, confident in its shields, confident in its weapons, confident that this world, like so many before it, would fall without much of a fight. They had no idea what was about to open its eyes beneath the moon. The mission to reach Cronus began 3 days after the Council gave its approval. There was no time to build new spacecraft, no time to plan a mission the way humanity once planned trips to the moon, with years of testing and careful preparation. Instead, engineers scrambled to modify an existing fleet of cargo shuttles, originally built for orbital resupply missions, into something capable of carrying a small team of scientists and soldiers to the lunar surface. Dr. Chen would lead the science team. General Voss insisted on leading the security detail personally, over the strong objections of nearly everyone around her. "You're the highest-ranking officer coordinating Earth's defense," Holloway argued during a tense meeting the night before launch. "If something happens to you up there, we lose more than one person. We lose our command structure." "If Cronus fails," Voss replied, "we lose everything anyway. I'm not sending soldiers somewhere I won't go myself." In the end, Holloway relented, mostly because he understood there was no version of the argument he could win. Voss had made up her mind, and nothing short of a direct order from the president was going to change it. And even the president, when asked, simply sighed and said, "Let her go. God knows we need someone up there who won't panic." The launch took place from a hidden facility in Nevada, one that had spent decades disguised as an unremarkable weather research station. 3 shuttles lifted off just after midnight, carrying a combined crew of 40 scientists, engineers, and soldiers, each of them aware that they were about to become part of history, one way or another. The journey to the moon normally took 3 days. With the modified engines pushed to their limits, the convoy made it in just under 30 hours. It was a rough, uncomfortable trip, filled with warning alarms and creaking metal, but every ship arrived intact. As they approached the lunar surface, Voss stood at the viewport of the lead shuttle and looked down at the pale gray landscape below, dotted with craters that had watched over Earth in silence for billions of years. Somewhere beneath that ancient dust, something equally ancient was waiting. "Command, this is Lunar Convoy 1, she said into her comm unit. "We are beginning our descent to the Cronus site." The facility itself, once they landed and made their way inside, through a hidden entrance built decades earlier by the original excavation team, was unlike anything Voss had ever seen. The outer tunnels were carved with human tools, reinforced with human steel, evidence of 60 years of careful, patient construction. But as they moved deeper, the walls changed. The steel gave way to a smooth, dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, etched with the same flowing symbols Chen had shown her back on Earth. "We're entering the outer defense grid now," Chen said, walking beside Voss with a tablet in her hands, monitoring readings that scrolled past too quickly for Voss to follow. "This is as far as any human has ever gone." They passed through a massive chamber, easily the size of a football stadium, filled with rows of dormant machines that looked like a strange hybrid of turret and statue, each one taller than a person, silent and still, coated in a thin layer of dust that had settled over decades of human presence. "Weapons platforms," Chen explained, noticing Voss's expression. "We've managed to bring about a third of them online in limited testing. The rest have never been activated." "And the core intelligence?" Chen led her to a smaller chamber at the center of the complex, where a massive structure rose from floor to ceiling, shaped like an enormous crystal, dark and cold, with faint lines of light pulsing slowly beneath its surface, the only sign that anything inside it was alive at all. "This is it," Chen said quietly. This is where we make contact. The activation process took nearly 6 hours. Chen's team worked in careful, precise stages, following a sequence they had spent years developing through painstaking trial and error, adjusting resonance frequencies, calibrating power flows, watching for any sign of the catastrophic failures that had haunted the project in years past. Voss stood at the edge of the chamber with her security team, watching, waiting, feeling the weight of every second pass by like an hour. Above them, on Earth, the Vraxel continued their assault. Reports trickled in through the shuttle's communication relay. Another mining town evacuated in Siberia. Another failed assault against the Amazon drilling platform. Another handful of pilots lost trying to slow down a war they could not win. "We're at 90% resonance," Chen called out, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air of the chamber. "If this works, we should see a response any moment now." The crystal structure began to glow more brightly, the pulsing lines of light beneath its surface quickening, spreading, until the entire chamber was bathed in a soft blue radiance. And then, without warning, a sound filled the room. Not a mechanical hum, not an alarm, but something closer to a voice, layered and strange, speaking in a language none of them understood, yet somehow felt they could almost grasp, like a word on the tip of the tongue. Chen's console lit up with data, streams of translated text scrolling faster than anyone could read.
"It's responding,"
she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "Oh my God, it's actually responding." The voice continued, and slowly, painstakingly, the translation algorithms began to make sense of it. Words appeared on the screen, fragmented at first, then more coherent. "Guardian protocol active. Awaiting verification." "Verification of what?" Voss asked. Chen typed quickly, sending a query through the interface her team had spent years developing. The response came a moment later, slow and deliberate, as if the ancient intelligence were choosing its words carefully. "Verification of threat. Vraxel presence confirmed. Guardian protocol will engage upon formal request from planetary authority." Voss felt a chill run down her spine. "It's been waiting," she murmured. "This whole time, it's been waiting for someone to ask." Chen looked up at her, eyes wide. "General, I think it's asking for permission." What followed was one of the strangest and most important conversations in human history, conducted not through spoken words, but through a slow, careful exchange of translated text between an ancient machine intelligence and a small group of exhausted humans standing in a chamber beneath the surface of the moon. The intelligence, which eventually, after some confusion over translation, identified itself using a designation that roughly meant custodian, explained that it had been placed there by the architects tens of thousands of years earlier, as part of a vast network of similar installations scattered across many worlds. Its purpose was singular, to protect any civilization capable of reaching it, once that civilization proved itself both capable and willing to defend its own existence. "Why did they leave it hidden?" Voss asked, her question relayed through Chen's translation system. "Why not just give it to us outright?" The response took several minutes to arrive, longer than any previous exchange. "A gift understood is a gift respected. A gift given freely, without struggle, is often wasted. The architects believed that a civilization must prove itself ready before it could be trusted with the power to defend itself. You have fought, you have struggled, you have come here despite fear, despite uncertainty. This is proof enough." Voss exchanged a glance with Chen. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "What can you do?" Voss finally asked. "Right now, today, what can you actually do to help us?" The custodian's response, when it came, sent a wave of stunned silence through the entire chamber. "The outer defense grid can be fully activated within the hour. The reserve fleet, consisting of 144 vessels, can be prepared for deployment within 12 hours. These vessels are armed with weapons capable of penetrating Vraxel shielding. I estimate a high probability of success, provided human forces coordinate effectively with the reserve fleet's deployment." Voss felt something she hadn't felt since the invasion began. Not just hope, but something closer to certainty. For the first time in weeks, she believed humanity might actually survive this. "Do it," she said. "Activate everything. We'll coordinate on our end. The reserve fleet requires human operators for full tactical control. The architects designed these vessels to be piloted, not automated. Without trained crews, their effectiveness will be severely limited. Chen's face went pale. General, we don't have trained crews for alien spacecraft. We barely have people who can fly modern fighter jets. Voss thought for a long moment, staring at the crystal structure pulsing softly before her, and then at the exhausted, hopeful faces of the soldiers and scientists who had followed her into this impossible place. Then we'll learn, she said. Fast. Word of Cronus's activation reached Earth within the hour, carried through a secure communication relay that Chen's team had rigged before departure. The reaction among the world's leaders was a mixture of disbelief, relief, and, for some, quiet anger at having been kept in the dark for so long. But there was no time to dwell on politics. Every available pilot, from every branch of every military on Earth, was put on alert. Within 6 hours, a call went out. Quiet, urgent, and unlike any recruitment call in human history, asking for volunteers willing to travel to the moon and learn to fly ships built by beings who had died out long before humanity had learned to walk upright. The volunteers came by the hundreds, then the thousands, fighter pilots, astronauts, even a handful of civilian engineers with experience in advanced aviation systems, all willing to take an enormous risk for a chance to fight back. Meanwhile, above the Earth, the Vraxil continued their assault, seemingly unaware, or uninterested, in the flurry of activity taking place on the far side of the moon. Their drilling operations expanded. Their patrol patterns remained unchanged. Whatever they were, whatever technology allowed them to sense threats across a solar system, it seemed the ancient, dormant systems of Cronus had gone unnoticed, hidden beneath the same veil of secrecy that had protected them from human eyes for 60 years. That, Voss knew, would not last forever. Sooner or later, the Vraxil would notice something was changing, and when they did, humanity needed to be ready. Standing in the great chamber, watching as the weapons platforms around her flickered to life one by one, their long-dormant systems humming with power for the first time in millennia, Voss allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope. "Chen," she said quietly, "how long until the reserve fleet is ready?" Chen checked her console, then looked up, her exhausted face carrying the faintest trace of a smile. 10 hours, General. 10 hours, and we go to war. 10 hours felt like 10 seconds, and 10 years all at once. Inside the lunar facility, the chamber that had once held rows of silent, dust-covered machines was now alive with light and motion. Engineers rushed between control stations, adjusting readouts they barely understood, guided step by instructions, translated from the custodian's ancient systems. Newly arrived pilots, still wearing the flight suits of a dozen different nations, filed into the deeper sections of the facility, where the reserve fleet waited. Voss walked among them, checking in, offering what encouragement she could, though she knew words meant little in the face of what these men and women were about to do. Most of them had spent their entire careers flying aircraft they understood down to the smallest bolt. Now they were being asked to climb into cockpits built by beings who had died out before the pyramids were built, guided only by rushed lessons and the quiet, patient voice of an alien intelligence speaking through translated text on a screen. "You ready for this?" she asked a young pilot named Captain Reyes, who sat in the cockpit of one of the smaller reserve vessels, running through a checklist that made no sense to anyone who hadn't spent the last several hours studying it. Reyes looked up at her, his face pale but determined. "Ma'am, 3 days ago I was flying a fighter jet that was designed in the 1990s. Now I'm sitting in a spaceship built by ghosts. I don't think ready is really a word that applies here. But I'll fly it." Voss placed a hand briefly on the edge of the cockpit. "That's all any of us can do." The reserve fleet itself was a marvel unlike anything humanity had built or even imagined. The 144 vessels ranged in size from small, agile fighters, not much larger than a human transport plane, to massive capital ships nearly a kilometer in length, their hulls made of a material the custodian identified only as living metal, a substance capable of repairing minor damage on its own, knitting itself back together the way skin heals a small cut. Each ship carried weapons far beyond anything in humanity's arsenal, beams of concentrated energy, capable of cutting through Vraxil shielding, defensive systems that could absorb and redirect incoming fire, and propulsion systems that allowed for maneuvers no human pilot had ever attempted, let alone mastered. It was, in every sense, A fleet built for war against an enemy the architects had clearly understood far better than humanity ever could. Dr. Chen spent the final hours before deployment working alongside the custodian, refining the translation systems that allowed human pilots to interface with alien controls. It was exhausting, precise work, and more than once she found herself wishing for just a few more days, a few more weeks, to make sure everything was perfect. But the Vraxil above Earth were not waiting for humanity to be ready. And so, with time running out, Chen made peace with imperfection, trusting that what she and her team had built would be enough. Systems check complete, she announced to Voss as the final hour approached. All 144 vessels report full power. Pilot integration is at 87%. Not perfect, but workable. And the custodian? Standing by. It says it will coordinate ship movements at the fleet level, but individual combat decisions remain with the pilots. It seems to believe humans need to make their own choices in battle, something about trust. Voss allowed herself a small, tired smile. Smart machine. The battle began at dawn, Earth time, though dawn meant little in the vacuum of space, where the fighting would actually take place. The reserve fleet launched from its hidden hangar beneath the lunar surface, rising up through a massive opening that had remained sealed for 60 years, finally cracking open to reveal the stars beyond. Voss watched from the command deck of the lead capital ship, a vessel the custodian had designated as the fleet's flagship, now crewed by a mixed team of human officers and guided by the ancient intelligence itself. Its presence felt through soft, pulsing lights along the ship's control panels. "All ships, this is General Voss," she said into the fleet-wide comm channel, her voice steady, despite the storm of nerves in her chest. "I know none of us expected to be here. I know none of us trained for this, our whole lives. The way we trained for the wars we thought we understood. But we are here now, and above us, our planet is waiting. Every person you love, every place you've ever called home. That's what we're fighting for today. Let's go bring our home back." The fleet moved out from behind the moon's shadow, and for the first time, the Vraxil noticed them. What followed was chaos, in the truest sense of the word. A battle fought across the vast emptiness of space. Missiles and energy beams crossing distances that would have taken human eyes minutes just to perceive. Ships weaving through patterns no simulator could have prepared anyone for. The Vraxil fleet, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of an enemy force wielding technology equal to or greater than their own, scrambled to respond, pulling ships away from their mining operations to meet this unexpected threat. Captain Reyes, in his small fighter craft, found himself in the thick of it within minutes, weaving between incoming fire, guided by instincts that felt both foreign and strangely natural, as if the ship itself were helping him understand its own capabilities. He fired his first shot in anger, at a Vraxil interceptor that had been harassing a group of human satellites just days earlier, and watched in stunned disbelief as the alien ship's shields flickered, buckled, and finally shattered under the impact. "Confirmed kill," he shouted over the comm, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. "General, it worked. They're shields. They're not invincible after all." Across the battlefield, similar reports began pouring in. Vraxil ships, that had once seemed untouchable, were falling, one by one, under the concentrated firepower of the reserve fleet. It was not an easy victory. Humanity's pilots were inexperienced, and several reserve ships were lost in the opening minutes of the battle, their crews unable to react quickly enough to the alien vessel's own defensive maneuvers. But for the first time since the invasion began, the tide of battle was shifting. On the ground, the change was felt almost immediately. The drilling platform outside Perth, Australia, which had resisted every human assault for over a week, suddenly found itself without air support, as the Vraxil ships stationed above it were called away to reinforce the main fleet in orbit. Australian and Allied forces, sensing the opportunity, launched a renewed assault, and for the first time, made real progress, forcing the platform's automated defenses into retreat. Similar scenes played out across the globe. In the Amazon, coalition forces pushed back the alien mining operation for the first time since it had begun. In Kazakhstan, evacuated civilians began cautiously returning to their homes as alien drones, their attention diverted, ceased their patrols. It was not victory, not yet, but it was something humanity had not felt in weeks: momentum. Back in orbit, the battle raged on for nearly 6 hours, longer than anyone had anticipated. The Vraxil, initially caught off guard, began to adapt, regrouping their scattered forces and launching coordinated counterattacks that tested the limits of both the reserve fleet's technology and its inexperienced human crews. Losses mounted on both sides. Voss watched from the flagship's command deck as reports came in of ships destroyed, pilots lost, each name a weight she promised herself she would carry long after this war ended, however it ended. General. Chen's voice came through on a secure channel from the lunar facility, where she remained coordinating support alongside the custodian. The Vraxil are pulling reinforcements from deeper in the solar system. Our sensors are picking up at least 200 additional vessels inbound from the outer fleet. Voss's stomach tightened. How long until they arrive? 3 hours, maybe less. Voss closed her eyes for a brief moment, weighing the cost of continuing this battle against the risk of what might come if the Vraxil brought their full strength to bear. She thought of Captain Reyes, of the hundreds of pilots who had volunteered without hesitation, of the ancient intelligence that had waited 60,000 years for a chance to fulfill its purpose. "Chen," she said finally, "ask the custodian a question for me." "What question?" "Ask it what happens if we lose here today. Ask it what it does then." There was a pause, filled only by the soft static of the comm channel, before Chen's voice returned, quieter than before. "It says if the reserve fleet is destroyed, the outer defense grid on the moon will continue to protect the lunar facility itself, but Earth will be left without further support. It says this may be humanity's only chance, General. It's not going to sugarcoat it." Voss opened her eyes, staring out at the battle raging beyond the flagship's viewport, the flashes of weapons fire, the slow, terrible dance of ships fighting for the survival of an entire species. "Then we don't lose," she said. "Rally every ship we have left. We hold this line until those reinforcements arrive, and then we make sure they regret coming at all." The final hour of the battle, before the Vraxil reinforcements arrived, was the most brutal yet. Human pilots, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline, pushed their unfamiliar ships to their absolute limits, coordinating in ways that surprised even the custodian itself, which noted, with what Chen swore was something close to admiration in its translated words, that human pilots displayed a willingness to take risks that exceeded anything recorded of previous species who had wielded the reserve fleet. Captain Reyes, his ship damaged and one engine failing, found himself protecting a stranded human vessel, a science ship that had lost power during the chaos of battle, from 3 Vraxil fighters closing in for the kill. With his weapons systems running low on power, he made a decision that would later be told and retold across every branch of every military on Earth. He flew directly between the stranded ship and the incoming fighters, using his own vessel's damaged but still functional shields to absorb the brunt of their attack, buying just enough time for reinforcements to arrive. He survived, barely, his ship limping back to the lunar facility on fumes and prayer. The story of his sacrifice spread through the fleet within minutes, and something shifted in the hearts of every pilot who heard it. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It had become something more, a fight to prove that humanity, whatever its flaws, whatever its long history of division and conflict, could rise to meet a threat this great, together. As the Vraxil reinforcements finally arrived, swelling the enemy's numbers to nearly 400 vessels, Voss stood on the flagship's command deck, watching the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Human ships alongside ancient alien vessels, piloted by the bravest men and women the world had to offer. Brace for the true battle to come. "This is it," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Everything we are, everything we've ever been, it comes down to this." Above her, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see whether humanity's oldest secret would be enough to save its newest, most desperate hour. The arrival of the Vraxil reinforcements changed the shape of the battle entirely. What had been a hard-fought, evenly matched engagement now became something closer to a siege, with nearly 400 enemy vessels bearing down on a reserve fleet already worn thin by 6 hours of continuous combat. Voss stood on the flagship's command deck, watching the tactical display fill with red markers, each one representing a threat that grew closer by the second. "General," Chen's voice came through the comm, tense but steady. "The custodian has a proposal. It says there's a way to even the odds, but it comes with risk. I'm listening. There's a fourth layer to Cronus, one we never had time to fully explore. The custodian calls it the Core Reserve, a single vessel, larger than anything else in the fleet, designed to be used only in the most extreme circumstances. It says deploying it now, mid-battle, carries significant risk of instability, since it was never meant to be activated this quickly. Voss stared at the tactical display, watching as another reserve ship's icon flickered and went dark. Its pilot's name added to a growing list she refused to stop counting. What kind of risk? The ship's systems weren't designed for rushed activation. There's a chance it could fail to stabilize properly, which the custodian says could result in catastrophic energy release. In simple terms, General, if it goes wrong, it could take out a significant portion of both fleets, ours included. Voss closed her eyes for a brief moment. 6 hours ago, she had asked her people to fly ships they didn't understand into a battle against an enemy who had already proven itself capable of destroying anything humanity had thrown at it. She had asked them to trust her, to trust a machine that had slept for tens of thousands of years, to trust that this desperate gamble would be enough. Now she was being asked to gamble again, with even higher stakes. "Chen," she said, "what does the custodian recommend?" There was a pause. "It says the decision belongs to humanity. It won't make this choice for us." Voss opened her eyes and looked out at the battle raging beyond the viewport. Ships burning, weapons fire lighting up the void like a terrible fireworks display. Brave men and women fighting for a planet that had no idea just how close it stood to either salvation or ruin. "Do it," she said. "Wake it up." The Core Reserve vessel emerged from the deepest chamber of the lunar facility, nearly 40 minutes later, rising up through a second hidden opening that had never before been used in the entire 60-year history of the project. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary sight. A ship nearly 3 kilometers in length, its hull glowing faintly with the same soft blue light that had first greeted Voss and Chen when they awakened the custodian, shaped less like a traditional warship and more like some vast, ancient creature stirring from a long sleep. The Vraxel fleet, upon detecting its emergence, hesitated for the first time in the entire battle. Sensors aboard the human flagship picked up a sudden shift in enemy formations, a defensive regrouping that suggested, for the first time, something resembling fear. "They know what that is," Chen said, her voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. "General, the custodian says the Vraxel have encountered architect-built vessels before, in other systems, in other wars. They know exactly what they're looking at, and they're not eager to find out if it still works." The Core Reserve vessel required no human pilot. Instead, it moved under the direct guidance of the custodian itself, its ancient intelligence finally given a body worthy of the purpose it had waited so long to fulfill. It advanced slowly at first, almost deliberately, as if giving the Vraxel fleet one final chance to reconsider their assault. When the Vraxel responded instead with a concentrated volley of weapons fire, the great ship's shields absorbed the attack without so much as a flicker, and then, for the first time in the battle, the Core Reserve vessel opened fire. The result was unlike anything the human pilots watching had ever witnessed. A single beam of concentrated energy, wider than most reserve fleet ships were long, tore through the heart of the Vraxel formation, vaporizing 3 enemy vessels instantly, and sending a dozen more spinning away, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer force of the attack. "My God," Voss whispered, watching the display in stunned silence. Captain Reyes, still flying despite his damaged ship, watched from a distance as the tide of the entire battle shifted in the span of a single moment. Vraxel formations that had held firm against 6 hours of human and architect firepower began to break, ships scattering in what could only be described as panic, their captains apparently realizing, all at once, that whatever they had come to Earth expecting, this had not been part of the plan. The battle continued for another hour, though it bore little resemblance to what had come before. With the Core Reserve vessel spearheading the assault, the combined human and architect fleet pushed the Vraxel into a full retreat, picking off scattered ships as they attempted to flee toward the outer edges of the solar system. The mining platforms on Earth's surface, suddenly abandoned by their orbital support, fell one by one to coordinated ground assaults, their automated defenses no match for human forces once freed from the threat of aerial bombardment. By the time the sun rose over the Pacific Ocean for the second time since the invasion began, the skies above Earth were, for the first time in over a week, clear of Vraxil ships. The remnants of their fleet, fewer than 60 vessels by most estimates, fled toward the edge of the solar system and beyond, leaving behind wreckage, abandoned equipment, and a planet that had, against every reasonable expectation, survived. Voss stood on the flagship's command deck as the final reports came in, watching the tactical display slowly clear of red markers, replaced instead by the quiet, steady green of friendly vessels returning home. She thought of Captain Reyes, of the pilots who had not made it back, of Chen and her decades of patient work, of Holloway and the small group of people who had guarded a secret for 60 years, waiting for a day they had hoped would never come. "General," Chen's voice came through the comm, quieter now, worn with exhaustion, but carrying something else too. Relief, perhaps, or the first fragile edges of hope. "The custodian is asking if you'd like to address the fleet. And General, it's asking if it's done well. I don't think it's ever had to ask that question before." Voss felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Tell it," she said, her voice thick, "that it did exactly what it was built to do. Tell it that humanity says thank you." In the weeks that followed, the world changed in ways no one could have fully predicted. The existence of Project Cronus, once guarded so fiercely for 60 years, was revealed to the public in careful stages, accompanied by both gratitude and anger. Gratitude for the salvation it had provided, anger at the decades of secrecy that had preceded it. Holloway and the small council that had overseen the project faced hearings, investigations, difficult questions about the ethics of keeping such knowledge hidden for so long. Chen testified for weeks, patiently explaining the reasoning behind decisions made by people long since retired or passed away, decisions she herself had inherited rather than made. Voss, for her part, found herself thrust into a role she had never sought, not just a military commander, but something closer to a symbol, a face the public associated with humanity's survival. She accepted the attention with the same steady discomfort she brought to everything else, more concerned with the practical work of rebuilding than with the speeches and ceremonies that seemed to follow her everywhere. The custodian remained active, its core reserve vessel now stationed in permanent orbit around Earth, a silent, patient guardian that had waited tens of thousands of years to fulfill its purpose, and seemed, in its own strange way, content to continue serving now that it finally could. Chen spent most of her days working alongside it, continuing the slow, careful process of understanding a technology that remained, even now, far beyond full human comprehension. It was during one of these long working sessions, several months after the battle, that Chen asked the custodian a question that had been on her mind since the very beginning. "The architects," she said, typing the query into her console, "the ones who built you. What happened to them? Where are they now?" The response took longer than usual to arrive, as if the ancient intelligence were considering how best to answer. "The architects are gone. They fell, long ago, to an enemy even the Guardian networks could not stop. I do not know if any of their kind survive. But they built well, and they built with hope. Hope that someday, somewhere, another civilization might rise to carry forward what they could not finish." Chen sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the words on her screen, thinking of the vast, empty spaces between the stars, of the countless worlds the architects must have once protected, of the long, lonely centuries the custodian had spent waiting beneath the moon for a chance to matter again. "Well," she finally typed, "you're not alone anymore." The response came quickly this time, almost as if it had been waiting to say it. "Neither are you." A year after the invasion, humanity stood in a position it had never occupied before, not as a lone, isolated species clinging to a single fragile planet, but as something new, something with allies among the stars, however ancient and quiet those allies might be. The reserve fleet, rebuilt and expanded with human ingenuity working alongside architect technology, stood ready in permanent orbit, a reminder of both the danger that had once nearly ended everything and the strength humanity had found within itself when that danger arrived. Voss, now leading a newly formed international defense coalition, stood on the observation deck of the flagship one quiet evening, looking down at the Earth turning slowly below, blue and green and achingly beautiful, the same planet she had nearly lost, the same planet she had spent her entire life protecting, without ever fully understanding just how much more there was to protect it from. Captain Reyes, fully recovered and now training the next generation of reserve fleet pilots, joined her at the viewport, the two of them standing in comfortable silence for a long moment before he finally spoke. "You ever think about what's out there?" he asked. "Beyond the Vraxel, beyond whatever the architects were running from? Makes you wonder what else is waiting." Voss considered the question, watching the slow, steady rotation of the world she had fought so hard to save. "I think," she said finally, "that whatever's out there, we're a little more ready for it than we used to be." Below them, Earth continued its quiet orbit, unaware and unbothered, the way it always had been. Except now, for the first time in human history, it was no longer alone in the dark, and it was no longer defenseless against whatever might come next. And somewhere beneath the surface of the moon, in a chamber that had waited 60,000 years to be understood, an ancient guardian kept watch, patient and steady, ready, at last, to be exactly what it had always been built to be.